words really worth not much. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I wish to thank all you who made this event happen. It is extremely important to spread the word of truth all over the earth, to show through the documentary what is the evil of a planetary scale that Ukrainian military and the whole Ukrainian nation is counters now, seeking for your help, unwavering help. It is very important that each and every person knows what is happening in Ukraine since February 24th. What is the nature of this war brought to my land? Horrific in its scale and character, unjustifiable. We need unity. As Ukrainian nation, united after this terrible act of terrorism put forward by Kremlin's regime against Ukraine, we need united world with us. We need solidarity and support. We're truly thankful for we already received from you, as message comes from the very bottom of your heart, but we still need more. You see what we are dealing with. You know what's happening now with ruining all the energy grid in Ukraine on the eve of the winter. But we need to do all is possible to show this film and other documentaries as widely as possible. Bring it closer to the decision-making circles, so every politician, every manager knows what is the origin of Ukrainian situation now, what is the origin of the war, what makes Ukrainians Ukrainians, why our fury is growing, and what brings strength to our military defenders, all the Ukrainian nation. What brings them this strength of spirit, bring them through all tortures, through all hardships, and not affecting their belief, strong belief in our victory, our common victory over our common enemy. I invite you for a round of applause to Ukrainian hero, our defender, Roman Hartnets. Please know, Ukrainians will be fighting to the end, means to our victory. And our common victory will come sooner than many think now. I wish you to thank once again for your support and solidarity. I wish to thank you for what you have done, arranging this very important screening of this documentary. And as we started with Ukrainian, I would conclude my short remarks also with Ukrainian. Вічна і світла пам'ять всім полеглим українським героям і нашим цивільному населенню в цій страшній активній фазі війни. Шана українським захисникам і захисницям. І слава Україні! I thank you so much.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, esteemed members of the press. Thank you for attending this very special event. I will have the four panelists please come up on stage. ladies first, Ukrainian born from the Donbass, Professor Olena Lennon. She's an adjunct professor of National Security Division of the Government and Public Service University of New Haven. To her left, David Simon, the director of Yale University Genocide Studies Program, Assistant Dean for Graduate Education at the Jackson School for Global Affairs. To my left, His Excellency Ambassador Malik Nadim Abid, Secretary General and Ambassador at Large, International Human Rights Commission. And to his left, William A. Vadym, who has been on the New York City Board of Education for 32 years, teacher and professor of history at New York University and on the advisory board of the University of Rajasthan in India. Thank you all for being here. When the conflict, which began 8 months ago, February 24th, I was personally in Syria, aiding child orphans. Syrians are no strangers to the heinous crimes against humanity committed by Putin's military. 50% of the once beautiful country of Syria is now uninhabitable. Since the invasion by Russian forces of neighboring Ukraine, it has killed tens of thousands, displaced millions. The latest United Nations numbers are in excess of 7.7 million refugees fleeing Ukraine, and an estimated 8 million have been displaced, which includes 2 million children. A child from Ukraine has become a refugee every single second of the war. Try to wrap your head around that statistic. It has shaken the global economy and reopened Cold War era divisions, bringing us now closer to World War III than since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. I will start with Professor Olena Lennon, and also ask if we, because I know we're on a time constraint, if you would keep your answers to the questions as concise as possible. Under 3 minutes, maybe even less, otherwise I might have to jump in. Okay, first question. Can you situate the war in Ukraine into a regional and global security context? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Tatiana, Victoria, Anya, for organizing this event. It was a gruesome documentary, but important to see. In terms of situating the battle for Mariupol, the siege of Mariupol into global context, I think it's no secret now that Russia is not just fighting against Ukraine, it's also fighting to rewrite the rules of regional and global security architecture, and fundamentally is fighting against democracy. But as far as the importance of battle for Mariupol itself, I would say that at the time when it was happening here in the United States, the narrative was that Mariupol is strategically important to Russia, that they were going to create a land bridge between Donbass and Crimea, that it was going to be a logistics hub, and so there were sort of rational explanations for that. And I think what at the end of the battle, when the siege ended, it became clear, I would say that 3 things became clear in the global context. One is that it's not, Russia is fighting to reduce cities of Ukraine to rubble, not because they're strategically important, but because they're trying to deny the state of Ukraine the right to exist. So it's genocidal, it's not rational necessarily, it's not about economy or NATO expansion, it's about denying the Ukrainian nation the right to exist. Number 2, the battle for Mariupol showed that the Russian army fundamentally has no rules of engagement. It's a criminal army, war crimes are rampant, and command and control is loose, and we're not even sure what rules of engagement are. And I think that presents a threat to the entire world, not just to Ukraine, knowing that a country that is a permanent member of the UN Security Council wages a warfare of that kind. And number 3, I think what the battle for Mariupol showed is that there's no way to negotiate with an army like that, with an armed force like that, with a government like that. I think that if there are any conversations prior to the Battle of Mariupol in terms of trying to make concessions and at the end of the day there will be political reconciliation, and that is all true. But I think the Mariupol siege was a case in point here that there was no way to make concessions to a fascist regime that Putin's regime is, and negotiations in the foreseeable future are not possible. So I will follow your order of 3 minutes, 3 points, and pass it on to my colleagues.
Pass the mic to Mr. Simon, thank you. David, regarding the meaning and rhetorical value of the word genocide, what does it mean to say that there is a genocide occurring in Ukraine or has occurred in Mariupol? What actions can we expect to follow from that?
Thank you for that. The question also, I'd like to add my thanks to the organizers of this event and for the esteemed guests who have come as well. I'm honored to be a part of this. The question about genocide is both straightforward and tricky. The straightforward part is that genocide has a legal definition created in 1948 UN Genocide Convention, and that it principally has 20 articles, but Article 2 lays out the definition of the crime of genocide. There are 5 different elements. They're not all necessary. They're a list is sort of either or. All 5, killing, torture, most notably, but also, and I have the convention in my pocket. We can parse it later. But all 5 have been unfortunately met. It's not, in my view, a difficult case. There is a question about intent. Because genocide is the commission of those acts with the intent to destroy a nation or other groups in whole or in part. I think that actually particularly with respect to unto itself, at this point in time, often the genocide declaration, in terms of, well, that's a legal definition, a court has to make that decision. Courts will do that, but over a very long time frame. And it will be much argued about jurisdiction and all sorts of issues. So I think the question also becomes, what relevance does it, is it useful to talk about genocide in a non-judicial context? And as I said, it's tricky. At the United Nations, the Genocide Convention offers no specific remedy or response to a finding of genocide. It doesn't even empower anyone other than a court of law to make that finding of genocide. And for reasons that I could go into later, you're probably familiar with, the United Nations is not, there's no organ at the United Nations that is about to make that decision. That is principally the Security Council, certainly won't for obvious reasons. The UN General Assembly has within its power, or at least a precedent in what's called the Uniting for Peace provision, to sort of step in when the Security Council has failed. But there's work to do, there's political work to do there. Nonetheless, the idea, the recognition of genocide is important. It's important for moral suasion. It's important because, for reasons that Professor Lennon has said, that you can't negotiate with someone. It's morally wrong to negotiate with someone who believes in the commission of genocide. And I will add as a final coda to this, because I think I'm about 3 minutes and 12 seconds at this point, that there are other international crimes that we shouldn't lose sight of simply because of genocide. Crimes against humanity, war crimes, and of course aggression. All even more open and shut cases, and cases for which there might be a more sort of ready response in the works on that. So thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Malik, microphone, please. You have great personal experience of war crimes committed in your nation country of Kashmir in Pakistan, and also being on the International War Crimes Tribunal in Bosnia. observing the parallels between the genocide in Bosnia and Ukraine, what is happening in Ukraine is also genocide. Please.
Thank you so much. First, with your permission, I quickly want to make two quick comments. First of all, sir, your personal sacrifice of your and heroes like you, they strengthen the nations. So thank you so much for your personal sacrifice that strengthened the nation of Ukraine. Thank you. And being a peace activist and a human rights defender, I just want to have one other quick comment. Our dear host who started this conversation, she mentioned that her son fights for the peace. Being a peace activist, I can tell you and I can assure you, you cannot fight for peace. When you fight, you're not fighting for peace, you're fighting. So let's rephrase it, working for peace. So, okay. So let's work for peace. And by the way, war, I also want to make a quick comment. Wars, you can plan the wars. We were discussing this before the conversation started, that it's predicted that it may take up to 4 years to finish this war. I can assure you that you can plan to start a war, but you can never plan to end the war the way you want. You never know how it's going to end, how long it's going to take. So war is never a good decision and good thing to start with and good way to finish. So I pray for people of Ukraine and of course, just like you mentioned, my own people of Kashmir. We are going through the genocide for the last 35 years under the hands of Indian occupation forces. United Nations have 22 resolutions to resolve this issue peacefully, but Indian army is killing people, civilians indiscriminately because they just want to change the dimensions or the geographic, the dimensions of the state. So yes, Ukraine is going through the genocide, but sir, with your permission, I would like to also comment. Security Council have 12 resolutions for Kashmir to give right to self-determination for people of Kashmir. It's never been implemented even after 73 years. But there was one resolution in Security Council to destroy Iraq, and when there is a will, the Iraq is destroyed. I just came back from Iraq 2 days ago and I still see the impact of that one resolution. So forget about the court or getting the judgment from the court of genocide. If you have the support, just like you said, sir, Honorable Ambassador, you need to unite the forces behind you, not to give you the bombs or rockets or missiles, but the resolutions. If you have the resolutions from the Security Council to actually contain Russia in their own agenda, so I think we can peacefully contain them instead of using the bombs. Bombs will never resolve the issues between Russia or Ukraine. It never resolved the issue between China and India. It never resolved the issue between India and Pakistan, all these nuclear states. So I suggest that let's try to give peace a chance. Let's try to find out some alternatives instead of finding the resolution with the bombs and missiles and the
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Vadym, you have been a student, teacher, professor of history much of your adult life. We often hear the saying, history repeating itself, or history is doomed to repeat itself. It's been tossed around by news media, journalists alike. What are your thoughts on this? And on this.
Well, we never learn. War has been part of the DNA of humanity. There never seems to be a solution, a way forward. And Excellency, 4 small miracles took place several months ago. Vincent went to Ukraine and brought out 4 families into safety. He's planning to return. Ambassador will go with him. 4 small miracles. As for how we learn from history, well, we don't. Every January 1, we always seem to think about the future. But it's so elusive. It never comes. And I'm as a student of medieval history especially, I'm amazed that with all the wonderful glories of the Renaissance, for example, and artwork in general, before you heard music of Beethoven, these are the pillars of such glory. Why do we destroy them? What is it in the human fabric of our being that wants conflict, anger, confrontation? So, as a child born 1 year before the end of the Second World War, I now am looking at World War III. We never learn. History repeats itself. It's very sad. I remember just one more thing. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, I would get Christmas cards from family members, and it said, "Peace on earth, goodwill toward men." When? Maybe it should be concession on earth and hope for humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Olena, in today's world, how does Ukraine event affect us all?
Well, there are several levels to that. Obviously, the most basic human level, right? And this is a war against humanity. You know, this is it's so brutal and so indiscriminate that kind of political objectives get completely drowned out. That is, you know, it's hard to wrap your brain around the level of destruction that is happening in Ukraine. And of course, you know, I just came back from Poland literally 2 hours ago. And they're bracing for a new wave of refugees coming from Ukraine, given that there's no electricity or heat. So obviously, you know, there's a physical impact, economic impact, but I would say the most important of those, you know, aspects and levels is, of course, the human aspect of this, because, you know, nobody's immune from genocide or aggression. Nobody. Ukrainians didn't, well, Ukrainians knew that this was coming. I almost said that Ukrainians didn't expect it. I think what Ukrainians have known for a long time, the world has finally woken up to. The Ukrainians have always, since 2014, we've been at it at least for 8 years. And I think that the reason the Ukrainian army has performed so well is also because they have known that this was coming since at least 2014. And the willpower and the motivation that, and the military capabilities that they have put forward are all a product of this deep realization that nobody is immune from this level of aggression. So I think we should all be paying attention, because at the same time, the only way that this war will end or will be managed, it's not going to end. I agree that perhaps it's human nature. Is endurance. At the end of the day, wars are won by endurance. It's whoever endures longer, economically, politically, socially, psychologically, and yes, militarily. Therefore, it is important to continue supporting Ukraine with, you know, all kinds of capabilities, defensive and offensive, socially, economically, embrace Ukrainian refugees, because it is endurance. It's whoever, and what Russia is trying to show now is that they have the willpower. They will level cities, that they will, what they're trying to show is that Ukraine means more to them than it means to the West or even to Ukraine itself. And we need to prove Russia wrong, that Ukraine means more to all of us, so that Russia doesn't win on endurance alone, just like the Russian Empire has won over centuries. You know, it's an empire that we keep expecting to fall apart, and it doesn't. It's an enduring empire. So we need to endure together so that we can win in the endurance department, and that's the only way.
Thank you. I have one final question for all of you to answer, and so we can take a couple of questions from the audience. In July, I met with a number of high-ranking military commanders and government officials in Ukraine, including Andrew Boychenko, deputy mayor of Kyiv, he's also the former chief of the national police of Kyiv, Alexeyevich Goncharenko, Ukrainian member of parliament. And all of them, on different occasions, said to me they felt the war would last 3-4 years. Maybe they're being overly optimistic, as we spoke earlier. But one thing they were very adamant about, that there would be no capitulation, there would be no concessions, and certainly no surrender. So given that, my question to you all is, how do you see this war ending? How do you see this, what will bring about a close to this tragedy? Let's start at the end. David, please.
Okay, thank you.
You have 5 seconds.
Right, I get the balance of my time, which is negative.
In 1 minute or less, go ahead.
Yes, so there's a good way and a bad way, to be honest, and the bad way, it has a lot to do with what happens in the West. I don't think the resolve of the Ukrainian people can be doubted whatsoever. I do have deep concerns about the resolve of Western Europe and the United States. It's the cold winter will be a challenge to democracies. There's a real chance that in this country, the victors of the upcoming election, depending on who they are, could be much more favorable towards Russia than the current administration and its party has been to this point. That frightens the heck out of me, but we have to encounter it as a real possibility. The flip side is that it ends with continued resolve. It ends with Russia discovering that its conscript-based military will crumple and is even weaker than the military has shown to be to this point. It's even possible by those lines that perhaps the end will come sooner than 3 or 4 years. That when Russia discovers that it can't last the winter, that some of the logistical problems that may plague them, it could cripple Russia, and it may involve a true challenge to the Putin regime. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Mr. Vadym, please.
Yes. There is a very unusual area called Kaliningrad, which is part of Russia. It's near North Poland and just under Lithuania. Now, both Lithuania and Poland are NATO. In order for Russia to go into Kaliningrad, it has to go either through the Baltic Sea or by land. And if war material is sent through the roads into Kaliningrad, how will NATO react? So I see expansion, regrettably.
Ambassador Malik, please, your thoughts.
Once again, my sincere apologies for telling you the truth. I'm not sure how after 4 years the war is going to end. What is going to be the result? 4 years is way too much to expect for people of Ukraine to go through. I mean, if you're talking about resolution of the war, with the bombs and rockets and missiles, I'm not sure what are we going to expect. Just like I always believe, and I just said, we have to find out some alternative resolutions, alternative avenues, and I personally believe that China can play a very positive role in building peace between the entire area. So we have to engage China. The United States had been pushing China into the corner as well, which is again the wrong policy. I would think that China should be engaged very positively, and China, in my opinion, can play a very positive role in bringing peace between, not only between Russia and Ukraine, but in the entire region as well.
Thank you.
You partially answered that question with my previous long comment, but I would just say, and as we say, Ukraine will win in the spring offensive. We just know what year. But I agree that it will be a political reconciliation, of course, but the military component is important because it helps strengthen the negotiating position. So right now, they're at it because Ukraine is trying to strengthen its negotiating hand, and it's important. And perhaps the military, that's not the solution, but I think it's important that Ukraine continues to deplete the Russian military power instruments so that Russia cannot leverage that against Ukraine and kill innocent civilians. And about a third of Russian military has already been depleted, and nobody expected it. History is not predetermined. I disagree that history repeats itself. Nobody expected Ukraine to be so successful on the military front, and yet here we are. As far as how this ends, we were talking about it earlier. I was pessimistic because in 2014 we thought it was going to end soon, and 8 years later it was still a frozen conflict. Right now we're in a war of attrition. I think it's going to take less than 8 years, but more than 2.
Thank you. Quickly, 20 seconds.
Thank you. I partially agree with you, Doctor. We in the Kashmir, we are surrounded by 3 nuclear states, India, Pakistan and China. The balance of power between the 3 states is preventing any kind of military action by either China to India or India to Pakistan or Pakistan to India. So I think partially you're right, and I suggest the American government do not give $1 billion, $2 billion, $5 billion weapons to Ukraine. If you really want to break the cycle of destruction, give the nuclear power to Ukraine so that there is an actual threat, just like India and Pakistan have the threat from each other, that if you use power against me, I'll use the power against you. You deserve nuclear power, sir, so that you can deter the Russian aggression.
Very good. Thank you. A couple of questions from the audience. We only have time for 2. Please raise your hand, stand up. Yes, this gentleman there. Please, your question for whoever will answer.
Thank you. Organizers, to the filmmakers, to the heroes who pretend.
Speak up a little, sir. Thank you.
Just say thank you to the organizers, to the filmmakers, to the heroes who defended Mariupol against Russian fascism. Propaganda has a way of distorting people's understanding of the realities on the ground. And I was wondering, in your opinion, how does propaganda shape people's opinion and shift people's belief about what is good and evil, right and wrong?
Anybody?
I can start. I love microphones, and I don't like the restriction of 3 minutes. I can keep answering your question till morning if you are here.
They're going to kick us out of here, Ambassador Malik.
But coming back to your question, it's a very, very valid and strong question. The first victim of war, remember, the first victim of war is the truth. When the war starts, the 50% of the wars are fought with the propaganda. And the only way to fight these days is the social media. You can spend hundreds of millions of dollars on propaganda, but if you fight your war on the social media, you can confront it, and I can give you one very strong example. Few years ago, there was a military coup in Turkey, and the Turkish army threw away the President Erdogan, his government. But social media helped President Erdogan up to the extent that he issued one message on the social media that in so-and-so time, so-and-so date, I'll be there and I want people to come out and support me. This is the only incidence in the modern history when the military coup was overthrown back just because of the social media. So social media is the power. You can use the social media, and I'm going to suggest to my friends from Ukraine that you should have a very, very strong team to manage the social media.
Thank you. Actually, I was in Turkey when that coup happened. Yes, I was.
How are you?
Anybody else care to add anything to that, Professor Lennon?
I'll just say quickly that even it's everything. Information is everything. The information environment in which people are cultivated, it predetermines how they respond to everything. But what's ironic about it is that I think Putin actually fell victim to his own propaganda. He is so his own hubris and how carefully curated his intelligence is misled him in the estimation of his own military power and overestimating the Russian military's capabilities and ability to run over Ukraine. So I think we're seeing how a dictator that fell victim to his own propaganda is just absolutely threatening to all of us. But what's also important is that to all of us here, it seems as though these are universal values, but what we keep forgetting is that as much as Zelensky, I think, has created an amazing information campaign and galvanized the world in support of Ukraine, it's important to remember that it's not the entire world that is supportive of sanctions and that is supportive of discontinuing trade with Russia. India and China, the two largest countries in the world that collectively make up with 3 billion people together, which is more than half of the world. Oh, actually a little bit less, almost half of the world, right? About a third of the world, are not necessarily on board with the EU and the United States in terms of sanctions and other punishments. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. We are here in our info silos, assume that these are universal values, but they're not. A lot of people are not supportive of this. So this is daily work that I think we need to be mindful of.
Lady in the green, please.
Hi everyone, I'm Olga. I just arrived from Ukraine, mostly just. But my question is that during wartime, nobody can tell the whole truth objectively. None of the government, no social media, and you just cannot read through social media every day long. But people need to know the truth and need to know the real objectives. So how to find balance between truth and falsehoods? Thank you.
And who will present the truth? This man and this man. We need to hear them on television. We need to hear them in print. Have to see them in print. Use social media. If people don't know what's going on, they're going to cook the steak and eat it and nothing will happen. But you have to send a message, a painful one. Your voice and your voice come to mind.
David, would you care to add?
No, I would just add that I think it is, globally there's a shortage of sort of discerning citizens who can make exactly that distinction. I think there's a real extent to which social media has, just to put it bluntly, made us dumber. And we are paying the price for that, in that social media is great for propaganda. It's really difficult for discerning the truth. And yet that's what we have. So I guess that's a long way of saying I don't know.
One last question. You've had your hand up for like 10 minutes. Yes, please.
Thank you so much.
Last question here. Yes.
Yeah, so my question is to the dear Ambassador Malik. And my question is, in 1939, 6 million Jews did not have any weapons. They were later exterminated during the Holocaust along of around 73 million other civilians who did not have weapons to fight back. And at the beginning of your speech, you said that instead of fighting for peace, and I have to say that both world wars were fought for peace and stopped with the response. And you, at the beginning of your speech, said that don't fight for peace, negotiate for peace. And at the same time, the Professor David Simon said that you cannot have negotiations with a person who believes in genocide. So my question is how, in these circumstances, you can still advocate for peace, if I got it wrong. And if you could travel back in time in 1944, knowing how many Jews were exterminated, not just Jews, would you still advocate for peace with Adolf Hitler? Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for asking me the question. I love when people talk to me instead of others. That's the first thing I like. But let me tell you, if you had the weapons, what you had done in 1944 or 1946, kill 6 million other people to be still alive, or the Second World War, how many people were killed before we achieved, so-called achieved the peace? That's my question to you.
18
So,
million.
so,
33 million.
so the weapon of war or killing each other is not the solution. I still condemn anything that goes against any human being, whether it's a Jewish, Indian, Pakistani, Ukrainian. It has to be a human being. Any action of aggression against any human being is condemned. But my question is, how many people had to be killed before the Second World War had to end? Thank you.
Nearly 80 million. Yeah.
That's the cost of the peace if you go into war to fight for peace. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? No, no, no. That's
It's
it.
a difficult question to answer.
And I won't go there. I want to thank all of our panelists, David Simon, Professor Olena Lennon, William E. JAUNE, and myself. Thank you all. I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. It was very illuminating for sure. I hope you all, I don't want to say had a good time, but under the premise of the evening, thank you.
And thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Victoria? Where's Victoria? Did she? Oh.
I have a lot of questions to you. I just didn't want to take time, but trust me, I have a lot. Okay, so I would like, before we close and wrap the event, and Victoria is going to do speech, I'd like to invite actually, not a pause in this statement, I would like a Roman, please, because Roman is our friendly organization that we're working together to revive soldiers of Ukraine. So the soldier that you see and other soldiers actually was brought by Roman's organization in Arena, and maybe we just say a few words. They're here just a guest, honorable guest, but I think
Thank you, Anna. So, Revive Soldiers Ukraine, we're a non-profit that was created right after the Crimea annexation and Donbass occupation. Roman was only 12 years old when Russia invaded Ukraine. Now Roman is 20 years old, and he lost, we were joking with him, he lost half of his body, and now he's back to 100% of his body, because he got the leg and the hand here in the US. We already brought about 52 soldiers, and there are 500 soldiers right now who are missing a hand, just like Roman is missing, so of course we have a lot of work to do here and everywhere. So thank you all for your support. Please volunteer and follow us on social media.
That's the power of my propaganda.
Well, we've come to the end of our event. I want to thank our panelists for their very insightful comments. I want to thank Vincent. I want to thank organizers, Scandinavia House musicians. Big thank you to Roman, the soldier who's here. You're our hero. And thank you to all of you, because only together we were able to make this event happen. We were able to stand up for what is right. Truth should not be a victim of war, and it's up to us to make it happen. We will follow up with you after the event with the ways of how you can stay involved, and we'll inform you of our future events. Thank you, and good night.